Zane Bradford didn't usually slam on the brakes for anything, especially not in the middle of a rainy Manhattan afternoon. But the tiny, soaking wet ball of fur darting into the street changed that. "Are you serious?" he muttered, throwing the car in park and ignoring the honks behind him as he stepped out into the downpour. His driver shouted something, but Zane only had eyes for the trembling kitten huddled under his Bentley's front bumper. It was barely bigger than his hand, soaked to the bone, eyes wide and terrified. God, it was shivering. Zane didn't think he dropped to his knees on the wet pavement and gently scooped the kitten into his arms. "Where's your mom, huh?" he said softly, cradling it against his chest. It meowed weakly, pressing against the warmth of his cashmere coat. Zane looked around. No mother cat, no owner, nothing but rain and sirens and the chaos of Fifth Avenue. "Yeah, all right," he muttered. "You're coming with me." The kitten sneezed as if in agreement. Back in the car, his driver stared at him through the rearview mirror like he'd lost it. Zane ignored him. He was already pulling out his phone, searching for the nearest vet. He didn't care how much it cost or how far they had to go. The damn thing looked like it hadn't eaten in days. "Find me a vet," he ordered. "Now." 15 minutes later, they were pulling up to a small clinic in Brooklyn's Sunridge Veterinary Care. Not his usual scene, but the reviews were glowing, and right now, that was all that mattered. He carried the kitten inside, rain still dripping from his clothes, his tailored suit ruined. The moment he stepped in, the scent of antiseptic hit him, and a soft voice called, "I'll be right with you." Zane turned and froze. The woman walking through the door wasn't what he expected. She had her dark hair pulled into a messy bun, a stethoscope looped around her neck, and a smear of something suspicious on her scrubs. But her eyes, those eyes stopped him cold. Bright, sharp, and impossibly expressive, like she saw right through people. "Let me guess," she said, walking over. "Stray in the rain," he nodded, holding out the kitten. "Found her under my car." She took the kitten gently from his arms, and the way her entire expression softened as she looked down at it, it did something to him. Warmed something in his chest he didn't know had gone cold. "She's freezing," the vet said. "Poor thing, let's get her checked out." He followed her into the back without asking. She didn't stop him. "I'm Sienna," she said as she gently laid the kitten on a warm towel. "And you are Zane," she glanced at him. "Zane." "Just Zane." She raised an eyebrow but said nothing, turning her focus back to the kitten. "You're lucky you found her when you did. She's malnourished, hypothermic, and her leg might be fractured." That made something twist in his gut. "Can you save her? I'll do everything I can." Her voice was calm, steady, confident. Zane didn't trust people easily, not in his world, but something about her made him believe her without question. While Sienna worked, Zane sat in the corner, watching her move with practiced ease. She spoke softly to the kitten, her hands careful and skilled. She didn't ask about his car, his clothes, his obviously expensive watch. She didn't seem to care who he was. He liked that. An hour passed. Then two. Finally, she turned to him, pulling off her gloves. "She's stable," Sienna said. "We'll keep her overnight. I'll need to run more tests, but I think she's going to be okay." Zane let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Thank you." She smiled, and it hit him in the chest again. That smile wasn't polished or practiced, it was real. "Do you want to name her?" she asked, wiping her hands on a towel. He glanced at the tiny ball of fur now curled up in a heated crate. "Hope." Sienna's eyes softened. "That's beautiful," he nodded. "She looks like she needs it." She stepped closer, not quite invading his space, but near enough that he caught the faint scent of vanilla and coffee. "All right, Zane, just Zane," she said. "Hope's going to need checkups, meds, and probably some physical therapy if that leg doesn't heal on its own." "You okay with that?" "I'll pay whatever it takes," her lips twitched. "That's not what I asked," he met her gaze. "I'll do whatever it takes." Sienna studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Good, because she's going to need a lot of care." "I can handle it." She tilted her head. "You sure?" "You don't exactly scream cat dad," Zane chuckled. "Yeah, well, neither did today scream rescue a kitten in the rain, but here we are." That made her laugh. It was a warm, unrestrained sound, and it stirred something unfamiliar inside him. All right, she said. You can visit her tomorrow. We'll see how she's doing, he hesitated. What time? 9. I'll be here at 8, she gave him a look. You know we don't open until 9, right? I'll wait. Sienna blinked, then gave him a half smile. All right then, Zane. He nodded and turned to leave, but paused at the door. Thank you again. For saving her, she asked. For caring. That night, Zane sat in his penthouse overlooking Central Park, staring at the empty spot on the couch where Hope should have been. Somehow, the silence felt louder than usual. He'd closed deals worth billions, flown to Paris for lunch, and walked out of boardrooms that made grown men sweat. But nothing today had shaken him like the sight of Sienna holding that kitten like it was the most precious thing in the world. He didn't know what he was feeling. But something had shifted, and he wasn't sure he wanted to shift it back. Zane was waiting outside the clinic by 8 sharp, just like he said he would. The morning air was crisp, the sky a pale gray canvas above the quiet Brooklyn street. His driver had offered to wait in the car, but Zane waved him off. He leaned against the brick wall of the small building, coffee in hand, his polished shoes incongruous against the cracked sidewalk. He didn't know why he was nervous. It wasn't like he had anything to prove. And yet, when he saw Sienna walking toward the clinic from the opposite end of the block, balancing a paper bag and a worn leather satchel, his pulse kicked up just enough to notice. She stopped short when she saw him. You weren't kidding. I never do, he said, straightening. She eyed the coffee cup. Bribery? No, he said. Insurance? She raised an eyebrow. In case you tried locking the door in my face, he added. That coaxed a slow, amused smile from her. If I were going to lock you out, I wouldn't be walking toward you. Zane stepped aside to let her unlock the door. She pushed it open and flicked on the lights, the hum of electricity and faint scent of antiseptic greeting them. Hope's in the back, she said, dropping her bag beside the front desk. She did well overnight, ate a little, purred for the tech. How's her leg? Too early to tell. But she's feisty, so that's promising. He followed her into the exam room where the kitten was curled in a small fleece nest, one hind leg wrapped in a temporary splint. The moment she heard them, her eyes opened and she let out a faint, scratchy mew. Zane stepped closer, crouching beside the crate. Hey, trouble? Hope pawed weakly at the air before settling back down into the blanket. She remembered you, Sienna said quietly. He glanced up. You sound surprised. Most people drop animals off and vanish. I'm not most people. I'm starting to see that. Zane stood and turned to face her. Her expression was unreadable, calm but not cold, observant, thoughtful. I'd like to cover whatever equipment you need here, he said. For Hope and for the clinic, upgrade whatever's outdated. Sienna crossed her arms. Why? Because it's clearly underfunded and I can afford to help. That's not what I meant, he met her gaze. You're asking what I get out of it, she nodded once. I don't know, he said honestly. Maybe I just like knowing you'll have what you need to do more good. She didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, the idea of owing you makes me uncomfortable. You wouldn't owe me. It's not a loan. No, but it would shift the dynamic. I'm not trying to buy influence, Sienna. What are you trying to buy? Zane exhaled and looked away for a beat. A second chance at doing something that matters. That caught her off guard. Her arms slowly dropped to her sides. You think writing checks doesn't matter? She asked, quieter now. I think it's easy, he said. Too easy sometimes. This, showing up, getting my hands dirty, sitting in a freezing exam room for a kitten that doesn't even know my name, this is harder. And I think I need harder right now. Sienna studied him, her expression softening without losing its edge. You're not what I expected, neither are you. That made the faintest flush rise in her cheeks. She turned back to the crate. She'll need a foster home when she's discharged. I'll take her. She looked at him sharply. Do you even have a litter box? No, he said, but I have a guest bathroom and a credit card. Sienna shook her head. It's not just about supplies. You can't travel constantly. She needs routine. Supervision. Commitment. I can rearrange things. You're telling me you'll change your entire life for a kitten? I'm telling you, he said, stepping closer. that I'm tired of living a life that doesn't make room for anything real. For the first time, Sienna looked like she didn't know what to say. He let the silence stretch, then added, "You could help, show me what I need, come by once a week, make sure I'm not screwing it up." A slow, reluctant laugh escaped her. "You want me to tutor you on cat parenting, exactly." She gave him a long look. "And if I say no? Then I'll probably Google things and end up raising a monster." That earned him a real laugh. "All right, one home visit, that's it. I'll take it." Later that afternoon, she arrived at his penthouse with a cardboard carrier, a bag of supplies, and a wary look on her face. The doorman had clearly been briefed because he let her up without question. Zane opened the door before she could knock. "This place is," she murmured, stepping into the marble-floored entryway with sweeping views of the skyline. "Yeah," he said. "It's a lot." He gave her a quick tour, then gestured to the guest bathroom he'd transformed into a makeshift cat suite. Hope's crate was there, along with a new litter box, feeding station, and a plush bed that looked more expensive than anything Zane had in his own bedroom. "You don't do anything halfway, do you?" she said. "Not when it matters." She knelt beside the crate and opened it. Hope stepped out slowly, sniffing the air, then padded over to her new bed and collapsed with a satisfied sigh. "Looks like she approves," Sienna said. Zane leaned against the doorway. "She's got good taste." Sienna stood and dusted off her knees. "All right, feeding schedule's in the bag. I left my number on the folder. Call if anything seems off." "Will you come back next week?" She hesitated. "Depends how well you follow instructions. You'll be impressed." "I'll settle for not horrified," he laughed. "Is there anything I can offer that would guarantee you show up?" She looked at him then, really looked. Whatever she saw seemed to shift something in her. "Dinner," she said finally. "You cook, I'll supervise. I can order from anywhere in the city." "That's not the point," he met her gaze. "Then I'll cook. 7 sharp." Next Thursday, when she left, the apartment felt different. Not quieter. Hope was already pawing at a toy mouse, but warmer, less sterile. Like her presence had left something behind. Zane sat on the couch, watching the kitten bat at her new toy, and realized he hadn't thought once about work, numbers, or the board meeting he'd skipped that morning. All he could think about was the quiet certainty in Sienna's voice when she said yes to dinner, and the way her eyes lingered on him just a moment longer than necessary before the elevator doors closed. He didn't know what was happening between them. But for the first time in years, he was ready to find out. The kitchen was filled with the faint scent of burnt garlic and something suspiciously resembling disappointment. "You weren't kidding," Sienna said, arms crossed as she leaned against the marble counter, eyeing the pan with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "You really don't cook?" Zane stared down at what was supposed to be chicken piccata. "It looked easier in the video. You watched a tutorial, I watched 3, she tilted her head, and still ended up with what looks like a tragic science experiment." He turned off the burner, defeated. "All right. I'll admit it, I'm a disaster in the kitchen. You're lucky you're good at literally everything else." He glanced over at her, and the moment stretched just long enough to register. She hadn't meant to say it out loud. Her eyes dropped to the countertop almost immediately. "You think I'm good at everything?" he asked, voice low. She straightened, clearly regretting the words. "I think you're used to getting your way. There's a difference." "But that's not what you said." "No, it's not," she admitted, picking up a glass of water and sipping it to buy time. "But don't let it go to your head." He grinned, then grabbed the takeout menu he'd discreetly placed on the far end of the counter. "Thai, rescue plan accepted." They ended up in the living room with cartons of spicy noodles and crispy spring rolls, Hope curled between them on the couch like a miniature queen in her throne. Sienna fed the kitten a tiny cube of boiled chicken she'd brought from the clinic, while Zane watched her like she was the one who needed tending. "Do you ever slow down?" she asked, glancing at him after Hope dozed off. "I thought I did. But then I met you." She looked away, a faint crease forming between her brows. "You don't know me. I know how you treat animals like people. I know you work 12-hour shifts at a clinic that barely has enough funding to keep the lights on." And I know you don't flinch when a stranger in $1,000 coat shows up soaked and holding a dying kitten. Her voice softened. You also know I have a temper when someone tries to pay for things I didn't ask for. He leaned back against the cushions. Fair. But I like that about you, she hesitated. Most people don't. I'm not most people. She looked at him again, longer this time. No, you're not. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was full. Like they'd both said more than they realized. Sienna cleared her throat. Why a kitten? He blinked. What do you mean? You could have stepped over her and gone back to whatever high-powered meeting you were late for. Why stop? He stared at the skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows for a moment before answering. Because I've spent most of my life stepping over things. She didn't push. She waited. I was raised to believe weakness was inconvenient, he said finally. I didn't cry when my mother died. I didn't flinch when my father remarried 3 weeks later. I stopped feeling much of anything, and it worked. I built an empire on that, but that kitten. He looked down at Hope, now curled into a soft, sleepy ball. She reminded me what it felt like to care. I couldn't walk away from that. Sienna's voice was quiet. You think that makes you weak? No, he turned to her. I think it makes me human. She studied him for a long time, then nodded once. You're not who I expected either, he smiled faintly. You keep saying that, and you keep proving it true. They sat like that until the food was gone and the lights of the city flickered like stars below them. Somewhere between a conversation about how to trim kitten nails and his confession that he'd never owned a pet in his life, she moved closer, not much. Just enough when her head eventually rested against his shoulder. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just let the moment stretch, anchored by the soft sound of Hope's breathing and the steady beat of something new forming between them. The next week passed in a blur of quiet domesticity. Sienna stopped by 3 more times, always under the pretense of checking on Hope's recovery, but Zane noticed the way her visits stretched longer each time. She brought over books on feline behavior, helped him install a scratching post the size of a coffee table, and once reorganized his entire pantry because expired quinoa is a crime. Every time she left, the apartment felt a little colder. And every time she returned, he found himself breathing easier. On Friday, she arrived late, her hair damp from the unexpected rain and her scrubs wrinkled from a double shift. Zane took one look at her and reached for her bag. You look like you're about to fall over. I probably am, she murmured. We had a hoarding case come in. 15 dogs, one of them bit a tech. He gestured toward the couch. Sit, I'll get you something. You're not going to cook, are you? God, no, I had soup delivered. She didn't argue. She collapsed into the couch with a grateful sigh, and he returned a moment later with a bowl of tomato basil and a grilled cheese that looked aggressively gourmet. She blinked at the food. You got this from Leclerc's. They owe me a favor. She took a bite and moaned softly. Okay. You're forgiven for the garlic incident. He sat beside her, watching her eat with the kind of quiet attention that made her feel seen in a way she wasn't used to. After a few minutes, she looked at him. Why haven't you asked me out? He blinked. You're here, eating dinner. On my couch. That's not a date. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Would you have said yes? She didn't answer right away. Then, probably not, Zane nodded. That's why. She searched his face. So what changed? He reached for her hand, brushing his fingers against hers. You're still here. Her breath hitched just barely. I like being here. I like you being here. Sienna's fingers curled around his. So ask me. He did, and she said yes. They didn't kiss that night. It wasn't the right moment. But he walked her to the door, held her coat while she slipped it on, and whispered something into her ear that made her laugh all the way to the elevator. The next day, he sent a bouquet of white tulips to the clinic. No card, just the flowers. That night, she kissed him. It wasn't careful. It wasn't hesitant. It was honest. Fierce. Like she'd been waiting too long to pretend she didn't want it. Zane kissed her back like a man who knew this was the first thing in years that mattered. Afterward, she rested her forehead against his and whispered, I wasn't planning on this. He held her closer. Neither was I. but neither of them pulled away. Sienna didn't mean to fall asleep on his chest. But between the long shift and the way Zane was tracing slow, steady circles against her back while Hope purred at their feet, she hadn't stood a chance. When she blinked awake, the city lights outside the windows had dimmed just enough to tell her dawn was near. Her head was tucked beneath his chin, one arm still draped across his chest. He was awake, his heartbeat slow and steady under her ear. "You could have moved me," she murmured, voice rough with sleep. "I didn't want to." She shifted slightly, propping her chin on his chest to see his face. His hair was tousled, his jaw shadowed with stubble, and there was a softness in his eyes she hadn't seen before. "You don't sleep much, do you? Not lately." He brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "Not since you started showing up here." She raised an eyebrow. "I'm keeping you awake, in a good way," he hesitated. "You make the silence feel full." Sienna sat up slowly and stretched, careful not to disturb Hope. Zane followed, reaching for the robe he'd left slung over the armrest. He handed it to her wordlessly. She took it, watching him. "You always this generous with your clothes." "That's the first time I've ever offered anyone that robe." She tied it around her waist, considering him. "You make it hard to keep you in a box." Zane stood, moving toward the kitchen to prepare coffee. "What kind of box?" "The kind I use to keep people at arm's length." He looked over his shoulder. "You still trying to?" "Less and less." He returned with 2 mugs and sat beside her again, their knees brushing. The quiet between them was easy now, the kind of silence that didn't demand to be filled. "Would it be crazy to say I want more of this?" he asked, her fingers tightened around the mug. "This? You, here, Hope, mornings that aren't just emails and meetings. Nights that don't end with me staring at the ceiling." Sienna hesitated, her words slow and careful. "I've never been in something like this before." "Neither have I," she glanced at him. "You don't seem the type to struggle with relationships." "I don't struggle with power," he said. "Relationships are different. You can't negotiate your way into someone's heart." "I don't know," she teased. "You're making a pretty compelling case." His hand found hers on the couch. "Then let me try something bigger." Before she could respond, he stood and walked into the bedroom. She heard the creak of a drawer opening, then the soft pad of his footsteps returning. He sat beside her again, something small tucked in his palm. "You don't owe me anything," she said, her voice low. "I know." He opened his hand slowly, revealing a velvet box. Inside, nestled against black satin, was a ring platinum, simple but breathtaking, with a single round diamond that caught the soft morning light and scattered it across the room. Sienna stared at it, her breath caught somewhere between disbelief and awe. "I didn't plan to do this now," Zane said, his voice steady. "But I can't keep pretending I don't know what this is. You're not just someone I want in my life. You're the reason I've started to believe I deserve more than what I've built." She looked up at him, her throat tight. "I don't want another day to go by where you don't know how serious I am about you," he continued. "So I'm asking. Not because I need to fix anything, or because I think this will change who we are, but because I want to build a future with you. Whatever that looks like." Sienna didn't speak right away. She took the box from his hand, closed it gently, and set it on the table beside them. Then she cupped his face and kissed him slow, deliberate, filled with something deeper than she'd ever allowed herself to feel. When she pulled away, her forehead rested against his. "Yes." The word was soft but sure. Zane's eyes searched hers. "Are you sure?" "I wouldn't say it if I wasn't." A slow breath escaped him, like he'd been holding it for weeks. "You terrify me," she smiled. "Good. You keep me grounded." He kissed her again, this time with a kind of reverence that made her heart ache in the best way. When they finally pulled apart, Hope stirred and blinked up at them, unimpressed by the emotional display. "She's going to hate sharing her bed," Sienna teased. "She'll get over it," Zane said, already reaching for his phone. "We're going to need more space." Sienna narrowed her eyes. "Are you seriously about to redesign your penthouse because of a cat and a fiancé?" he added, standing. "We'll need a new place anyway." "I want something we choose together, something that feels like ours." She stood too, crossing her arms. "You don't do anything small, do you?" Zane took her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. Not when it matters. They spent the day walking through neighborhoods she loved, quiet brownstones in Cobble Hill, sun-drenched lofts in Soho, places with exposed brick and creaky floors and charm that couldn't be bought. Zane let her lead, never rushing, never pushing. He didn't care how long it took. All that mattered was that they found something together. 3 weeks later, they signed for a brownstone with ivy crawling up the front, and a tiny garden in back that Sienna swore she'd turn into a sanctuary. The night they moved in, Zane carried her across the threshold not because it was tradition, but because she'd twisted her ankle hauling cat towers up the front steps. She laughed the entire way, and when he finally set her down in the living room, she kissed him until he forgot his own name. Hope adapted instantly. She claimed the sunniest window seat and ignored every new toy in favor of an empty moving box. Zane and Sienna spent their nights unpacking books and debating where to hang art, their days filled with clinic visits and surprise lunches and stolen moments that reminded them how lucky they were. They didn't rush the wedding. There was no need. What they had was already permanent, already real. When they did finally choose a date, it was because they wanted to celebrate it, not because they needed the label. The ceremony was small. Just close friends, a garden strung with lights, and Sienna walking barefoot down a grassy aisle toward the man who looked at her like she held the entire world in her hands. After the vows, Zane whispered, still terrified. She smiled. Still grounded. And they kissed while the stars blinked above them and Hope yawned from her perch on the patio railing, unimpressed as ever but exactly where she belonged. And finally, so were they. The first time Zane saw Sienna in the garden in her threadbare overalls and rubber boots, hair tucked beneath a faded baseball cap, she was elbow-deep in a raised planter bed, arguing with a stubborn rosemary bush like it owed her money. He leaned against the doorway of their kitchen, sipping his coffee, one eyebrow raised. "I don't think threatening it will make it grow faster," he said. Sienna didn't glance up. "It's not listening to reason." "I'm escalating." He grinned, stepping barefoot into the morning sunlight and squinting at the chaos of herbs, wildflowers, and tomato vines she'd somehow coaxed into life. "You know, there's a whole team of professional landscapers who do this in a day. I don't want a team, I want a garden." "There's a difference." Zane crouched beside her, brushing a smear of soil from her cheek with his thumb. "You're getting dirt on your ring." "It's not made of sugar," she said, but she turned her hand over anyway, admiring the way the diamond caught the light. "Besides, this is the first time I've ever had a backyard. I'm not wasting it." He looked around at the thick ivy wall that shielded them from the neighboring brownstone, the faint sound of jazz drifting from someone's open window, and the wild, sun-drenched beauty Sienna had created from what had been a neglected patch of weeds. "You didn't waste it," he said. "You made it yours." She leaned into him, resting her temple against his shoulder. "Ours." Hope trotted out from the open kitchen door, tail flicking, and immediately bounded into a paper bag Sienna had left near the gravel path. The bag crinkled violently as she attacked it from the inside with a vengeance that had become her trademark. "She's definitely ours," Zane muttered, eyeing the shredded remains of what he was fairly certain had once held pastries. Sienna laughed, and he could feel the sound against his chest. "You know, I thought I'd miss the chaos of the clinic more. The rush, the noise, but I don't. You still go in part-time. It's different now. I look forward to coming home. That never used to happen." He didn't say anything to that. He didn't need to. It was in the way his hand found hers, their fingers lacing easily. In the way they sat in the sun without a clock ticking over their heads. That afternoon, they hosted their first small gathering in the garden, just a handful of friends. A few of Sienna's colleagues from the clinic, some of Zane's business partners who'd become real friends after the walls came down. The table was mismatched and charming, set with wildflowers Sienna had picked that morning and hand-thrown pottery plates she'd found at a local artist studio. Zane barbecued, something no one quite believed until he started flipping perfectly seared salmon fillets. Sienna made a lemon tart that had everyone asking for seconds. Hope, naturally, made her rounds like a celebrity, accepting chin rubs and stealing unattended shrimp tails. As the evening stretched on and fairy lights blinked to life above them, Sienna caught Zane watching her from across the table. His expression wasn't intense or possessive. It was quiet, content, like a man who'd finally stopped searching for something he didn't know he needed. Later, when the guests had left and the garden was quiet again, she found him at the sink, sleeves rolled up, washing dishes with a focus that made her heart tug. "You know, most billionaires don't do their own cleanup," she teased, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind. "I'm not most billionaires," he said without turning. She rested her cheek against his back. "No, you're not." They finished the dishes together, music playing low in the background. When the last glass was dried and put away, Zane turned to her, brushing her damp hands aside to frame her face with his. "I can't believe you're really here," he said, voice low. She touched her forehead to his. "I'm not going anywhere." The next morning, they took Hope to the vet for her final check-up. Sienna let one of the junior techs handle the exam while she stood back with Zane, arms crossed, watching with a proud but professional eye. "She's completely healed," the tech said. "Strong, mobile, no sign of the old fracture," Zane exhaled. "She's a fighter. She had a good reason to survive." Sienna glanced sideways at him. "You gave her that," he shook his head. "We both did." They left the clinic with a clean bill of health and a new travel carrier that Hope immediately disapproved of. Zane carried her like a suitcase anyway, ignoring the judgmental glares she shot him through the mesh window. On the way home, they stopped by a bookstore Sienna loved. While she browsed the fiction section, Zane wandered into nonfiction and emerged with a book on architectural design. "You plotting something?" she asked, eyeing the cover. "I've been thinking about the upstairs loft," her brow furrowed. "The one we haven't touched. I want to turn it into a library. Big windows, floor-to-ceiling shelves, a place to read with you or watch you read." She stared at him, then reached out and tugged him down for a kiss right there between the cookbooks and biographies. "I thought I had a future mapped out," she said, lips brushing his. "But it was too small for this. For us." Back at the house, they spent the evening painting the loft a deep navy blue. Zane didn't mention that he'd already hired a custom shelving carpenter to start work the following week. He liked the way Sienna's laughter echoed against the bare walls. Liked that they'd spilled paint on their clothes and didn't care. By the time the shelves were installed, and the chairs arrived, a pair of oversized velvet armchairs in forest green, the room felt like a sanctuary. One afternoon, Sienna fell asleep there, book splayed across her chest, Hope curled on her lap. Zane found them like that and quietly snapped a photo, the kind he'd never show anyone. It was just for him. Proof of peace. Months passed easily. The garden bloomed in new colors. Sienna started a weekend program for young, aspiring vet techs. Zane stepped back from 3 board positions and started building a wellness foundation in honor of his mother, funding clinics like the one where he'd first met Sienna. They didn't talk about the wedding again until late October, when the leaves turned to flame and the air carried the first breath of winter. They were walking home from a cafe, fingers laced, when Sienna paused at a boutique window displaying vintage lace dresses. "You never asked what kind of wedding I want," she said. Zane turned to her, eyebrows lifting. "That's because I want whatever you want," she smiled. "I want something simple, honest, just us and the people who matter." He leaned in. "That's exactly what I want too." And so, on a clear day in late November, with the trees bare and the sky the color of slate, they married in their garden. Sienna wore a dress that looked like moonlight and bare feet. Zane wore a dark blue suit with no tie, just a boutonniere of rosemary and lavender clipped straight from Sienna's garden that morning. Their vows were handwritten and imperfect, and full of everything that mattered. When they kissed, Hope let out an audible yawn from her perch on the patio rail, and everyone laughed. After the ceremony, they danced barefoot on the lawn under strings of lights, the music soft and low, the air cool but not cold. Later, after the last guest had gone and the candles had burned low, Zane carried Sienna inside, past the kitchen, past the loft, and into the bedroom they'd made together. He set her down gently, kissed her like he had all the time in the world, and whispered into her ear, "Thank you for not walking away that day in the clinic." She traced his jaw with her fingertips. "Thank you for stopping your car." They fell asleep with the windows open and the scent of rosemary drifting in from the garden. Hope took up her usual spot at the foot of the bed, curled into a perfect spiral of fur and attitude. And in the quiet dark, Zane reached for Sienna's hand under the covers, their fingers finding each other with the ease of something that had always been meant to be. They didn't dream of more. They didn't need to. Everything they had was already right here.